So, okay. So obviously, first of all, thank you so much to everybody for joining us. We're hoping it will be as high value as it possibly can be. We're here today. My name's Greg Freeman. I'm the in charge of the commercial team at kleene.ai. And obviously, we're joined by Matt Sawyer, who is formerly Chief Data Officer at Trainline.com, Head of Business Intelligence at Just Eat, Chief Data Officer at Momondo Group, which is cheap flights, and went through a large exit previously, just like the others did with their IPOs. And what we're really here to do is just share the story of building out the foundations of a single source of truth for a scaling business. The reason that Matt created Kleene was to give scaling businesses the same opportunity that he'd had with his massive budgets in his previous roles. So we really see this creating a single source of truth as massively important. I would encourage you, if anybody's got any questions about specific areas, or even if they're not necessarily specifically pertinent to the conversation right now, but you just want to ask Matt what his experience is, what his thoughts are on a topic, put them in the chat, and I'll pick those up as we go through, and we'll have a Q&A at the end. As I've said, it's going to probably be a 25 to 30-minute presentation would be my guess, just on the foundations of creating a single source of truth in a scale-up business, and then we'll take as many questions as we've got. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us, and I will hand over to Matt now to kind of take the reins.
Awesome, thanks Greg. Thanks everyone for joining us, much appreciated. What I'm going to do is chuck a presentation on the screen. So we've got something to guide us as we go through. Amazing. So I know people are still joining, so for those who've just dialed in, I'll just very quickly recap a little bit on my background that Greg's just talked through. So really built my career in the sort of analytics space. I've been very lucky with my career to date. Worked at some great brands. I was just sort of right place, right time. I think Just Eat is really where this sort of thinking around data and business intelligence and all the encompassing technology really started cementing together. So ended up building out the BI team at Just Eat prior to their IPO, going through that IPO how many years ago it was now, and then moved on and repeated the journey at Momondo Group. It's a flight meta search company. Cheap Flights is the UK brand, before they were acquired by Kayak, and then most recently a couple of years ago I was Chief Data Officer at Trainline. And really the inspiration for this, what we've built at Kleene, and the journey that we take clients on, sort of boiled out of that, if you like. It was a realization that I was doing the same thing each time. All these companies are solving the same fundamental challenge, which I'll get into shortly, and solving it in a very expensive, sort of time-consuming manner, involving a lot of headcount, involving large pieces of technology and deployments, and realizing that, you know, the smaller businesses in the world who don't have those enormous bottomless pits of cash like the Just Eats and Trainlines of this world do, just would find it very difficult to compete on a level playing field. So really, and the realization that is just not necessary in this modern day and age. So we set out to build software in that space, and Kleene was born out of that. So what I'm going to do is take us on a little bit of a journey on building a single source of truth for a business, specifically for businesses such as yours, in that sort of scale up space, that rapid growth phase, where data is absolutely crucial as a differentiator. So I'll launch into this. As Greg said, any questions, just whack them in the chat, and we'll come to those at the end. I'm going to try and watch the time as I go. 6:10 now, so I'll try and whistle through this nice and quickly, and then we can pick up the questions towards the end. So I'm going to set the scene a little bit first off with what we're really talking about when we talk about data and BI analytics, and it's data-driven decision making at its heart. So I'm going to go into a little bit of detail about that. I'm going to talk about that as pertains to scale-up businesses. So the who, if you like, what the value is from organizing your data. What's the prize at the end of this technological tunnel, if you like, and then we'll get into the how. So I do intend this to be a practical session. I want everyone on this call to go away with a better understanding of what a data platform should look like in 2020 than when you dialed into this call. So that's really the aim. And off the other side of that, once you've built that data platform, how do you set about pushing data back into the business and really encouraging, empowering that data-driven decision making? And then the really critical bit, when. So how do you get started? I'm going to talk the sort of ideal data platform, and I will talk at the end about how to take the first step towards that, and when that is right to do. Okay, so without further ado, let's jump into this. What does BI comprise of? BI, business intelligence, analytics, whatever it is you want to call it. The way I break this down in my mind, which I find useful personally, it's a mental framework that I use to think about this. I think about the what has happened, and that is really your reporting, your dashboarding, your automated. The prize at the end of the tunnel is automating this stuff, but it's reporting looking backwards. What happened last week? What happened last quarter, last year, etc., etc. Those dashboards that get pushed out to the business. That's the what has happened. The questions that arise from those reports and those dashboards, the why has it happened and what are we going to do as a result? That is really where the analysis and insight it comes from. So there's this distinction between reporting and analysis, and I think that is a nice way of thinking about it. What if? So this is your scenarios, your forecasting, your modeling, your looking forward, your projections. And we're getting into a little bit of maths here. We're talking probabilities. We're talking linear regressions, that sort of thing. But it's definitely still part of the analysis framework, if you like. And finally, the sort of cherry on top of all of this is if you really get data right and you really are capturing everything that's available to you as a business, you can start to think about the possibilities of actually leveraging that data as an asset. So this is stepping into the world of machine learning, AI, data science, and pushing data products back to your consumers. If I just to cement that a little bit, put some meat on the bones of that, if I think about an example for anyone who uses Trainline. I use Trainline to buy a ticket up to Manchester. I'm currently sat in a hotel room in Manchester. And when I was getting on the train, it asked me how busy the train was. And before I got on it, it recommended where to get on the carriage to maximise the chance of getting a seat. Now, obviously, the strange times that we find ourselves in, the train was half empty, so seats were no problem. But that product is the result of a data science initiative that was conducted at Trainline called BusyBot. And what that does, it scrapes data from Twitter, from news feeds, from the app itself, collates sentiment analysis around cancellations, around delays, all that kind of thing, and stitches that together along with geolocation to understand how busy a train is on any given route at any given time. So it's an example of leveraging the data that is able to be captured by the products at Trainline and using that to actually produce a useful tool for the end user. And that's really a good example of data as an asset and the data science initiative. So if we think about data for a scaling business and using data for that scaling journey that you guys are on, growth is absolutely key. it's king. It's the thing that we need to focus attention on it at that sort of stage. And I think the adage that great predictions require good data is just absolutely true in this space. So in order to know where those opportunities lie, make informed decisions about what to do with your product, where to look for market opportunities, how to optimize your marketing spend. When budgets are tight and goals are lofty, data is really crucial to informing those decisions. So I think there's never a better time to really think about leveraging data in that way. I think at these early stages, I've talked about my roles as Chief Data Officer at businesses like Train9 and Just Eat. Not many companies have a Chief Data Officer or a Chief Information Officer at this stage, and certainly in that sort of scale up phase, it would be unusual. So typically the CFO in those companies actually ends up taking on that role. So absent a CTO or a CDO, finance tends to drive the data journey. That's a very typical place for businesses to find themselves in, and that is a natural thing. Finance often owns the metrics, and therefore owns the data behind those metrics, and really those KPIs that exist, usually owned by finance, end up equaling the reporting structure in a business, and that's really exactly where you want to be. You want to be mapping your reporting infrastructure to the KPIs that are important to the business. So this, of course, all typically starts in Excel. And I'll caveat everything that I'm going to say for the rest of this evening with Excel is an incredibly powerful tool, and in no way is the aim of a good data program to get rid of Excel. However, the aim is to move Excel to its rightful place and leverage the right technology in the right places to do the heavy lifting. So all Excel fans out there, we're not trying to get rid of it. And the really key thing here is the quicker you can get to that utopia of automation, automating the repeating processes, the quicker you can move from data from administrative to advisory. And what I really mean by that is getting past the sense of everything being reactive and reporting, looking back at what's happened and scrambling to try and identify what's happened, and instead into the advisory phase of here are opportunities that we could exploit, that we could explore. I think that is really the goal that we should all be aiming for. So why? What's the value in doing this well? I think this is hopefully reasonably intuitive, but I'll whistle through it anyway. I think that as we sit here in 2020, there's an expectation from investors, VCs, PEs, of data literacy. There's an expectation that you have control of your own data, you have an understanding of what's happening in your business, and you are leveraging data to inform your decision making. So I think I would go as far as to say it's becoming table stakes to have this stuff done right. The sort of converse of that, data inaccuracy or absence breeds mistrust is obviously what I've written there. I've been in more meetings than I care to remember where we have arguments about whose number is right, and questioning of the data at a fundamental level, and that's never a good place to be. Those meetings are inevitably a waste of time. So getting this stuff right and clearing up that or removing that mistrust is really critical. So the organization of your data just removes that as a blocker. This is a really critical point I want to linger on for a moment. So organizing your data well really exposes the gaps. It exposes where you're not capturing that vital data point, where that source system, which I'll come on to shortly, is configured incorrectly. It's a pushback that I've often had in my career, that actually a data program, a centralization of data, absolutely needs to happen. Yes, of course, we buy into this vision, but first of all, we need to sort our ERP system. We need to sort our CRM system. We've got to get our web tracking right, whatever it may be. And actually, the reverse of that is true. get the data pulled out of those source systems and centralized into that single source of truth, and then start to see what's what. See where that source system is not quite on the money, and save yourself an enormous amount of time doing a Salesforce implementation or a Microsoft Dynamics rollout, whatever it may be, where actually one of the or many of the problems that you're trying to solve are all to do with data. Careful data democratization empowers analysis. What do I mean by that? What I mean is by pushing reporting out to functions. So finance have the reports that they need to make their decisions. Marketing have their reports showing their spend and their ROI. What that does is frees up your data professionals, frees up your data, the data itself, to actually be leveraged for the second point on that slide earlier. So you're moving past that reporting and dashboarding, and you're moving into the analysis. You can only really do that once you've got the data pushed out. And the reason for that is that, and again, it's something that I've seen time and time again, businesses where a central data team or an analyst, and when I say central data team, it could be one person. And when I first joined Just Eat, I was the only analyst in the business, and this was my my daily working experience. I was constantly on the back foot with people asking me what had happened the day before, what had happened last week, how can we compare today's numbers with yesterday's numbers, and me being very reactive. And of course, the reality of that is that my time was used up answering those what had happened yesterday questions, and never having the headspace or the time to get on to the what are we going to do about it and why it's happened and who cares. So by pushing that ownership of those metrics, of those reports down into the business, you get to a place where analysis is empowered. So how do you do this? This is all about uniting silos. And what do I mean by a silo? Well, really, a silo is any source data system. And what you may perceive as having a finance data problem, a marketing data problem, a product data problem. We don't have visibility of ROI. We spend ages manually putting together our general ledger or our profit and loss. We don't have clear visibility of how people use our product. All of those are symptoms of a singular root cause, and that is the absence of a single source of truth. It's the absence of that thing at the heart of the business that collates that data, pulls it all together. As I say, any data source is a data silo by definition. So that could be an Excel spreadsheet into which you put your forecast data. That could be your ERP system. It could be your CRM, etc., etc. I'm stealing my own thunder actually, because the next slide I go into a little bit more detail on this. So we'll come back to that. Really critically, data is orders of magnitude, 10x, 100x more powerful when you combine it together. If you think about a customer journey, let's imagine a B2C or D2C business, a customer journey through a website. It starts with marketing data. It starts with you serving them ads on Facebook or Google Ads, SA360, something like that. They arrive on your website. Multiple touch points through the website. You're tracking them in Google Analytics or Heap or something like that. They hopefully they transact, they buy something, or they book an event or whatever it is that your product offers. All of these things are creating touch points that are really informative about that customer, and obviously in aggregate about all of your customers. But each of them in isolation only tells a very small part of that story. By combining them together, you get that single customer view, you get that full visibility of the customer journey, and you can start to really optimize the process, the products, the tooling in that space to capture the data first and foremost, and then really exploit it to move the needle on all those metrics that are important for you. So the combination of that data is incredibly powerful. So to that end, build a single source of truth. Get data from Heap, from Google Analytics, from Facebook ads, from etc., etc. Push it all into one place and build the logic in that central location. And I'll go into more detail on that shortly. So this is me stealing my own thunder. So silo examples, as I say, anything that produces data. That is really the simplest way of thinking about it. So these are just some examples, but any system that is used in the business to do some sort of process and produce data, it can be considered a silo. So hopefully some of those are striking resonant chords with some of you out there. So what does this actually look like? Okay, we're going to get a little bit technical. I'm going to show you a very high level sort of architectural schematic for a well-structured data architecture. So we start on the left-hand side with the company domain. And when I say domain, I mean the bit that you as the business own, and those data producers, those are your data silos. So it's your ERP system, your CRM, your Excel spreadsheets, your web tracking, etc., etc. And what we want to be doing is grabbing data from those source systems, extracting the data, and loading it into a central lake, into a central repository, whatever you want to call it. And the whole point here is that we're picking data up from those source systems and we're moving it without doing anything to it. We're just picking it up and dumping it into another location to create that central store. It's at that point that we layer up data modeling. The transform, the business logic is probably the best way of thinking of this. So you end up with this extract, load, then transform. And the result of that transform is a curated, sorted, ordered data warehouse that gives you your single customer view. It gives you your marketing view of your data or your customers, etc., etc. So the output of your business logic being applied to that raw data is your data warehouse. What do you then do with it? This is where you connect it into a visualization tool. Examples of visualization tools: think Power BI, think Tableau, think Looker. There are so many on the market, and they're all powerful. Critically here, they will all have connectors available. You can plug data straight in from the left-hand side of this diagram, straight into that visualization tool, missing out this lake warehouse layer. And really critically, and if you take nothing else from this webinar, remember this: it does not scale. Without that bit in the middle, it does not scale. So the creation of that warehouse and the plugging of that visualization tool into that warehouse is the right way to do this. So from that visualization tool, Power BI, Tableau, Looker, we can build all of the reports and we can automate those reports. So your report consumers, this is going to be your senior stakeholders, your decision makers across the business. They will be consuming reports from that BI tool of choice, which in turn are fed data from that data warehouse. Critically as well, this is also the first port of call for your analysts in the business. So they will be looking at the same data that's used to produce those reports to perform their analysis. But those analysts can also go straight back into the data warehouse, write SQL against that data warehouse, then go into that lake, write SQL where appropriate, or maybe they'll be using other tools, Python, R, those kind of that kind of tooling. So accessing data directly in that central store and central warehouse that you've created in that middle layer. So in this way, you can start to automate everything: that extract and load, that transform, the connection to the visualization tool, the construction of those reports. All of that should just be happening on an automatic flow. So no human involvement required. Your analysts down there in the bottom right of this diagram are then freed up to do the real value add. And that is the critical thing. You'll often hear the stat quoted that 80% of a data professional's time is spent doing all the stuff in the middle of this diagram unnecessarily. If you can automate that, you are buying an enormous amount of time for those highly skilled individuals. Some examples of the kind of technology that we're looking at in the middle here. So I think the other critical thing to take away from today, this is all leveraging modern cloud compute. So I've thrown up the three, obviously the big three players in cloud infrastructure: AWS, Google Cloud, and Microsoft Azure, and the different database and lake technologies that they provide. So we're looking at Amazon Redshift or Snowflake. Obviously, Snowflake have been in the news quite a lot the last couple of weeks, given their IPO. We're looking at BigQuery or Snowflake for GCP, and we're looking at Synapse or Snowflake in Azure. So, of course, Snowflake is a cloud agnostic tool. It's software as a service. You can deploy it in any of the big three clouds. So that's the sort of technology that we're going to be leveraging, and that's the thing that has really enabled this entire architecture to become a thing in 2020. So looking at this in a slightly different way and thinking about the different ways in which you can actually achieve what I've just laid out. So again, data sources, extract and load to build your data lake, transform, business logic. Always think transform is an application of business logic to build your data warehouse, and then your visualization, your BI tool. So I think route one on this, hire some data engineers, at least one, equip them with engineering tooling. So whatever their code base is, they'll be looking at tooling, open source tools, combined with almost certainly some software as a service tooling, DevOps to stand up and manage that cloud infrastructure, analysts on top of that, and BI tooling. And who would be doing this kind of thing? So this is absolutely the world that I existed in for all of my career, and I think it's unnecessary for the businesses that I worked at. Actually, I don't think it's the best option for them. Where this option really does make absolute sense is for huge enterprises who have very, very unique data challenges for which technology that you can buy off the shelf is not going to solve it. So I'm thinking Facebook, Google, Amazon, the really big players who are fundamentally data businesses and are on the very coal face of the technology that sits behind all of this stuff. That's where you would absolutely want to go the route of option one. Option two, at the other end of the scale, consultancy and a black box solution. And what I mean by that is exactly what I say. So where would that fit? Because it absolutely does make sense. I think it makes sense when you have a very specific singular output that you want. Let's say you want to understand your marketing attribution modeling. That's it, just that in isolation. And you're happy to not necessarily be able to pop the hood on that. You just need to be able to get to a place where you can understand the ROI from your marketing spend. Then this option probably makes sense. It's not going to scale. It's not going to be something that you can bring back in-house, but it is going to provide you with a solution to that challenge. And really, if you're thinking in that kind of data science space where you have a specific output, option two could be a good one. But they will be going through these steps one way or another. And the final option, modern automation plus an analyst and BI tooling. So that modern automation is replacing your engineers, engineering tooling, DevOps, and cloud infrastructure ownership. You can automate that away. Now, of course, that's the space that Kleene sits. There are other options. Greg will kill me for saying, but there are options in that space as well. So I think that makes sense for people who are looking to solve this, pull the ownership internally, understand what's happened, and have the analysts in a place where actually, as the data professionals within a business, they can own the entire stack. They can own from data source through to analytic output. These modern tools empower that and really replace the work that data engineers would typically do with tooling. Okay, so let's imagine that we've been on this journey. We've built this shiny single source of truth in the middle of the business. It's automating stuff, and we can get into a place where we can start really pushing data-driven decision making into the business and moving forward at pace. So, quick recap. As I said, data democratization is all about handing control to your teams. Empower your marketers to own their marketing decisions with insightful reports that tell them what's happened and critically what's going to happen if they pull on that particular lever. If they dial their PPC spend up, what's going to happen? That kind of forecast and modeling. Your finance team having the reporting that tells them exactly where their profit and loss is at any given moment, automated, happening overnight. That's the kind of world that I'm talking about. Handing people back time critically. So that transform layer, that application of business logic, construct it once in that central source, construct it well, automate it, and be done with it. Very, very often you will see calculations of specific metrics happening in multiple places. People doing redundant work, often in Excel sheets, in their, whatever their own tooling may be. So maybe they're calculating revenue one way over here, and they're calculating revenue another way over here. There it doesn't include VAT. Here it does. There it doesn't include shipping. There it does, etc., etc. Decide that business logic, centralize it, document it, have that data dictionary, and push the result of that out into the business. This means that you can get past that reporting task. You can get away from the reactive and you can get onto the proactive. And it's only by doing this, I feel like I'm probably laboring this point, but it's really, really critical. You get past that point by automating the reporting. Automating the reporting and designing the reporting really, really well. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. The real utopian ideal that you want to get to, and this is possible, I have been there, is this construct that we call insight of the speed of thought. So imagine a scenario where you can go into a meeting, into the boardroom with your C-suite, your senior managers, and one analyst, and you sit that analyst down, get him to plug his laptop or her laptop into the screen at the end of the board table. Put Tableau up on there or Power BI, completely blank, and just start throwing questions at them for any given domain. So tell me about orders last week, show how that trended. Okay, now break those orders down by geographic region, break it down by customer type, be that value, demographic, behavioural, whatever it may be. Okay, add in our products. How does that split across products? Asking questions, immediately having answers. That is really the prize here. If you get this stuff right, that is possible. So the critical thing, when I say reporting, it's aligning reporting to the KPIs that are important to your business. Very often you'll see businesses with hundreds, if not thousands of reports. And that is a symptom of a business who doesn't have reporting in control, doesn't have data in control. The reports that you have, the dashboards that you have within a business should align very tightly to the KPIs that are important. And there's a clear methodology to employ there, where you think about what is the God metric for the business, typically revenue or EBITDA. What are the levers that you can pull on to influence that God metric? And you end up with a cascading set of KPIs. Your reports should give visibility to those KPIs, and that people who have their hands on those given levers should own the particular report, or rather have ownership of the output of that. Okay, so we're nearly there. How are we doing? Yes, perfect, on time. So, as I said earlier on the architectural diagram, you can plug your BI tool directly into data sources. It doesn't scale, but it is a nice way to do a proof of concept. So yes, a data warehouse absolutely is the answer. Data warehousing is a concept that's been around for a very long time. We're not inventing anything new here. And unfortunately, that's a bit of a double-edged sword. It's well understood, but it's also understood as a very big enterprise level, multi-million-pound project. And it simply isn't in this day and age. So yes, it is an answer, but often you're going to have to get buy-in from the rest of the business to engage in that particular project. As I say, not as hard as history would tell us, and it's really rarely too early. It's very easily too late, in the sense that it will be a harder journey the longer you leave it, but it's rarely too early. So that proof of concept, you can get a long way with an analyst, and I put analyst in inverted commas there because this doesn't have to be a specific data analyst hire. Don't necessarily need to go to market if you don't think that person is already in the business. It could be somebody with the curiosity and with the cognitive space to have a go at this. Get them something cheap, get them a Tableau license or a Power BI license, and get them to have a bash at putting some data together and putting together some proof of concepts. See what the art of the possible reveals. That I think is the critical bit here. Build the case out, prove it out, and give us a shout. That I think is really the takeaway here. It's about proof of concept, but no further. You have to have that middle layer, that data warehousing layer, to centralize the data, centralize the logic, or you end up in a place where it inevitably doesn't scale. Okay, I'm going to shut up for a second and
cool.
play this.
Yeah, obviously there's questions. There's questions. One question's come into the chat, but I'm going to give everyone else a little minute to think whether they've got any questions off the back of that. You can put them in the chat, or once I've read out the question which is already in the chat, obviously you've all got microphones and voices, so we can go to more of a question and answer type thing. I've got a couple obviously that were sent in via email first, but I'll get to reading Mayank's and then we can go from there, Matt, once your voice had a quick break. So Mayank has asked, once the data is available in the data warehouse, how intuitive is it to run both reports and then analytics on it? Does it still need an analyst? Or let's say, could a manufacturing plant manager or finance person or supply chain person, can they build their own reports and analytics?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think if you have built your warehouse well and you've constructed your reporting well, if that's where it ends, then absolutely your factory floor manager, your supply chain manager, they will be able to explore that report, that or set of reports, quickly, simply, and intuitively themselves, assuming they understand their own domain. If they don't, you've probably got bigger problems. The analysis side of things, that is a skill set. I think if you're really wanting to get into the exploring the sort of larger possibilities with data, you are going to want to have an analyst in the business. Now, I'm expressing my bias slightly. Of course, this is the career that I've been on myself, but I think that data analysts are worth their weight in gold. Now, the sort of skill set that you're looking at there, SQL critically. SQL is going to be the language of the data warehouse, and I think that's the thing that is going to rule out the sort of wider exploration for for people whose day job is not that world, right? So your manufacturing manager, your supply chain manager, then they're probably not going to be able to write detailed SQL. There are exceptions that prove the rule, but yeah, the reporting should absolutely be owned and empowering for the decision makers at the end of them. But to do the really sort of in-depth analysis, you're going to want to hire an analyst. That I think is inevitable.
Okay, cool. So they're pouring into the chat now, which is fantastic. Keeps it very interesting because they're all quite varied as well. So Andrew has asked, where does data governance fit with this approach? Where would you execute this phase, or is it a more iterative approach as you do proof of concept, rollout of a data warehouse? Obviously interesting with why you're in Manchester tomorrow and the conversation up there. So yeah, it's very relevant, I think, to where that fits into the whole piece, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So data governance is, it's a dry, sometimes slightly scary term. Master data management, metadata capture, data governance, security, etc., etc. That exists as a fundamental sort of function of a well-constructed data warehouse. So if you think what governance really involves, it's ensuring data provenance and lineage. It's ensuring that people can see the data they need and know more. So of course GDPR and these kind of security constraints should absolutely be embraced within the construction of the warehouse. So ultimately it sits in the lake warehouse area, and as you build that out, it should be iterative, and it shouldn't be a blocker to execution, I think is the critical thing. So it's not a matter of build it all and then apply governance. It's apply governance throughout as you build this out. So ensuring that that those security controls and controlling who can see what, and capturing the lineage and the sort of change management on your data all goes into that extract and load and transform area. It's a huge topic in and of itself, so that was a very kind of high level, slightly woolly answer, but yeah, we could dive into it.
Okay, brilliant. So again, this is how different these questions are, which is fantastic. I'm actually going to pull from one of the ones that came in advance now, just so that people who emailed ahead don't feel like they've missed out by emailing ahead. So this one's quite short and sharp, actually. Comes from John G. so I don't know who that is, but hope you're on. What's most important to a startup or a scale up, I guess, in this context, reporting or using data?
Yeah, so I think I sort of went on this point quite a bit within the presentation. I think one kind of empowers the other. So reporting is critical to make the startup scale up feel in control of what's actually happening. And I think we can talk about that internally at Kleene. We're a rapidly scaling business ourselves, and of course we are leveraging our data. And before we were leveraging our data with our CRM, we use HubSpot. We didn't feel entirely in control of our own pipeline. We didn't feel entirely in control of what was happening and why it was happening. By putting that data in and building some standard reports and getting some standard metrics out of that, it means that we can then start doing analysis, because those reports breed questions naturally, questions that you then go and answer with analysis, which means you're then leveraging the data to move the business forward. So it's this sort of virtuous cycle. I think getting to a place where those reports are automated, as I've said in the presentation, really unlocks the ability, the headspace, the cognitive space, and the time to go after the real sort of value add from data.
Okay, brilliant. I'm going to hop back into the comments now. So Tom, you touched upon the reactive stage you were in at Just Eat. Which of your 3 options did you take at the time, and how long did that solution last? So that's probably, I think that's referring to when you went in as an analyst. Which of the 3, the build it, consult it, or automate it, which probably didn't even exist actually when you were, which is why Kleene exists now. But which of the first 2 options, I guess, did you take at the time, and how long did that last? How successful was it?
Yeah, great question. So this is going back a little bit, more time than I care to remember. Actually, it kind of really ages me. We are talking around about the kind of advent of AWS. So we were one of the first clients, if not the first client, in utilizing Redshift in the UK, Amazon Redshift as a cloud data warehouse. So it does kind of predate a lot of the options that exist now. And as I say, it's what really inspired the build of the application we have at Kleene. So the route that we ended up inevitably taking, well, first of all, I had to do a lot of politicking, and there's no better word than Machiavellian scheming to build enough credibility and line people up enough to get the budget to go and hire the engineers, build the infrastructure in the cloud, put all that stuff together. So we inevitably ended up going down the option 1 route of hire people and build it internally. And it was painful. It took probably 2 to 3 years, 2.5 years, I'd say, to get to a place where that was really sort of functional, viable, and useful. So it and parts of it still exist today. As far as I know, they certainly haven't gone down a sort of replace it with off-the-shelf tooling route. Again, as far as I know, so it lasted, but it was sort of stripped down and rebuilt repeatedly. And this is often what you find with that route in a business like that. It's very difficult to retain engineering talent, data engineering talent. And when data engineers leave, you backfill them with other data engineers who come in, don't understand what's been built, and end up tearing it down and rebuilding it from scratch. That's a very, very typical pattern in this space, and one that is really difficult to prevent happening. Simply as a result of the myriad options of in that engineering framework. So yeah, have that for a rambling answer.
Yeah, that one was one of your more rambly ones.
Thanks.
Blah blah has asked, what would the analyst skill set look like in option 3? A mix of DBA brackets SQL Python R and business analyst skills question mark. So again, going back to that slide with the 3 options on, what would the analyst skill set look like?
Yeah, let me just put that slide back up just so we're all on the same page. Yeah, another great question. Love this. So DBA, definitely not, and that is true actually. Kind of across the board these days. It's a skill set that is not really required in the data space, and that is thanks to those cloud data warehouses that are on the previous slide. You know, your Snowflakes, your Redshifts, and so on. They are Amazon, Google, and Microsoft are really minimizing the amount of DBA work that is really required with what are getting towards sophisticated SaaS solutions. So the analyst really, skill set number one, I said it in the presentation, but skill set number one is SQL. Absolutely need to have SQL. With SQL comes an understanding of relational data, how to join data, how to extract value from data in a data warehouse. I think if you're getting into the sort of modeling and the linear regression and that sort of side of things, that's where you start touching on things like R and potentially Python. There are things that you can do in Python that you can't do in SQL. There are things that you can do in SQL that are much better handled in SQL than in Python. So it's a matter of having someone who understands where to use which tool. But you hit the nail on the head with SQL, Python, R. That's a strong analyst toolkit, I would say. And then really fundamentally, it's that analytical mindset, the ability to ask the questions and then translate those questions into a bit of SQL, Python, or R code to get to the answer.
Yeah, as a separate interjection there as well, if anybody, regardless of your relationship or non-relationship with Kleene, is considering making that first hire, like, we will always support you on that, answering questions, what kind of ways you can test them, and what kind of skill set they may need. So never be afraid to reach out to any of us. I can PA for Matt and Drew if that has to be the case, or you can go to Matt directly on that kind of question. We'll always support on that kind of stuff. I'm just going to come back to the pre now, before going back to the comments. This you kind of answered on as part of it, but the question originally, before they'd seen the content, was we struggle to get all the data we need into Salesforce to have a single source. Any recommendations on tools for this? It comes from Anonymous, and I don't know why it's anonymous, but it is. So, it sounds like they're trying to use Salesforce.com to solve for reporting, would be my guess, but obviously can't help that really.
Yeah, so I'll put this slide back up. Really think of Salesforce as existing on the left-hand side of this diagram. You'll inevitably run into difficulties, and you can replace Salesforce with Microsoft Dynamics with any number of sort of ERPs and big CRMs. Using them as a single source of truth is not going to work fundamentally. And the reason for that is the data structure behind the scenes for these tools is designed specifically for that operational purpose, right? So Salesforce it's a behemoth. It's a whole sort of ecosystem behind the scenes, but fundamentally it's a CRM. It's a tool for managing data in that manner, and therefore it's not purpose built for handling data of multiple different types, handling the flows of data, the processing of data. For that, you do need the bit in the middle. So it's an incredibly common path that businesses end up going down, and there's a whole. You're going to get the cynical me now. There's a whole sort of business or raft of businesses built on consultancies for Microsoft Dynamics, for Salesforce, and so on, who seem to be predicated on get the tool in there and then try to push everything into it, knowing that it's going to be a very, very long, very, very expensive project that ultimately probably isn't actually going to work. And doing it this way, as is on screen, gets you to a place where those tools can really function to do what they're designed to do. So yeah, I think that the error there is utilizing or attempting to utilize Salesforce as your single source of truth.
Okay, cool. Last two then, unless anybody's got any more to put in. We've still got 5 or so minutes left. But James has asked, who needs to be involved in the initial setup of a data project? Is it just a data team, or would you need involvement or time from a non-technical person? I don't actually know whether that's a data project or a clean project. So well, let's go with it's a data project.
Yeah, it was a clean project. Actually, was my my specific question.
Okay. But it's a clean project.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I'd say the answer is probably the same. Actually, either way, the ideal is that you will have the data team as a sort of internal champions for a data project, and they will take the rest of the business sort of on that journey. If you've got a data team, then the business is obviously already investing in data, and will hopefully sort of buy into that decision and that journey. Saying that, everything that's on screen now, which really is the sort of technical implementation of a data project, it's a means to an end. The value is on the right hand side of this diagram. It's the reports, it's the analysis, it's the extracting value from data. So and that is of course completely it's unique and bespoke depending on the business that you're implementing data for. So ideally you get into a kind of use case type scenario, and we will often do this as Clean. We will talk to senior stakeholders and say, what is it that you would expect to see out of a data project, and we will ensure that that is delivered as part of that implementation. We'll unlock it, we'll empower it, or we'll deliver it directly. So the ideal is data people own it, data people own the delivery of value. The reality is there will often be some hand-holding for interested parties across the business to ensure it lands and lands well. That I think is critical to success ultimately.
Yeah, we've kind of solved for that, because you were asking about our projects. Like, we've solved for that because we understand that most people at that scale don't have data people anymore. Like, they've not got to that point yet. So we offer professional services which helps with that implementation and that ongoing analysis, so that you don't have to worry about it. So you don't need those data champions in there. We can solve that for you. And then the final question we've got is from Reactive. How do we identify which data is to be collected? What should be the workflow in segregating and identifying the data? Should we do it at extract and load stage or at the transform stage? I think obviously there's probably a strategy stage where that also comes in, Matt, but obviously I'll let you dive into that.
Yeah. So the really high level answer is extract and load everything that you possibly can. All data is valuable, even if you can't think of a particular use for it right now. So building that lake, that store, whatever it is you want to call it, that contains all the data that you can get your hands on, is definitely step one. And actually capturing all the data is often easier than capturing the bit of the data that you think you might need, because there's less thinking involved. Just grab it, dump it in. The transform, that sort of application of business logic, is where you're going to be creating that more curated view. And exactly as Greg said, there's typically a strategy session where you're going to want to think about what's on the right hand side of this diagram. What are the reports, what are the KPIs, and what is the data that's required to get to a measurement of that KPI and reporting against that KPI. And that is going to inform what happens in this bit here, how we combine those different bits of data. So I talked about capturing marketing touch points, capturing on-site touch points, etc. How you combine those together and then aggregate them up in the reporting layer is going to be informed by that strategy session. But certainly you should be grabbing everything you possibly can from here. So a strategy session would typically look like, what are the data sources? What are the KPIs? And then we stitch them together in the middle. That's the sort of super noddy high level quick answer to that.
Cool. Okay, so we've got about 30 seconds left, which is perfect timing for me to say thank you all very much for joining us. Obviously, we're running a number of these. I believe, I'm going to confirm, but I have just confirmed, I think, our next one will be with like a major UK brand. So we'll be joined by a head of data from Gymshark on the next one of these next month. So that'll be well worth keeping your eyes out for. Gymshark have obviously got a phenomenal data program, have done so much with their own business and growing that data piece out. So we're really pleased to have Max, who's the head of data there, joining us for the next one. Keep your eye out for that. Invite colleagues, etc. on the next one. If you've got any questions, you can connect with us on LinkedIn. We'll follow up to get the recording in your hands so you can get that out to colleagues as well. Any questions you might have that come off the back of this, don't be afraid to ask either of us, because we've both got different takes on it, and we'll both try and be as helpful as we possibly can. And we hope to speak to some of you really soon. Thank you very much for joining us, guys, and we'll close it down now.
Cheers, mate. Thanks for coming.
Cheers. Thank you.